Hello, Jared. Conastantu, Ishmisha Aaron Edwards. Hello and good day. That's Gaelic for hello, welcome. How are you? Thank you so much for being here. This is episode 45 of Inspiring Insights. That's right. We're coming up on a year now. It's been a very long journey, and in the same breath, it feels like no time at all. I feel very honored and overjoyed to be able to be consistent with this podcast and to continue this. And it's because of all you folks out there listening that I'm here doing this today. So thank you. And I think you'll really like our guest today. If you'd like to personally sponsor an episode, please reach out to me, or if you know somebody who would like to sponsor an episode. My email is hello@reawakenco.com. And a little bit about me before we start. I'm an uprooted Newfoundlander. I have Irish and Welsh descendants. I am the offspring of 2 teachers, and I feel like I have much to learn and much to teach, and also much to step into in my own teachings, including, beginning to think about healthcare and mindfulness in a way that is a little bit more queer, is a little bit more intersectional, and a little bit more encompassing to all walks of life and to the diversities that exist out there. And so now I guide soul-centered human transformation here in Takarono, where I take up space. That is the Anishinaabeg word name for Toronto. And I just want to, before we begin, do a little shout out to the nations that were here before folks settled in this region: the Anishinaabe, Chippewa, Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, and more recently the Mississaugas of the Credit. And as a newcomer and a settler here, I have been invited to lift the one spoon with all others who care for this land within that Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Treaty. And as a part of that, I commit to respectful collaboration and representation here on this podcast. Just as I have been invited to lift the spoon, I invite you all now to also lift that spoon and to peaceably weave with me a new world of possibility in wellness and in healthcare, and to really start paving the way for a more accessible wellness industry and what that looks like, what healing looks like. I think this year we've all started to hopefully take a few steps towards decolonizing our language, decolonizing even our careers, maybe the ways in which we think and act about medicine and spirituality and healing. And for me, that means uplifting and supporting folks and using my voice on a platform for change, for breaking cycles. And I think that's what Inspiring Insights has been about this past year. So, podcasts in general, listening and speaking, they have so much potential for healing. And before I introduce you to our guest tonight, I just want to do a little bit of housekeeping, and I also want to invite you guys to heal the process. Start this healing process. Begin to see with new eyes in ways that about topics and conversations and things that you have never even thought about or even wanted to dive into. And if you have questions or comments, we are recording this live. We got a few folks here live today. Thank you for being here. And for everybody out there in podcast land listening to this recording, we thank you. We feel your energy here. And thank you for showing up. So without further ado, we have Brook Thorndycraft. Brook, you live in Halifax, Nova Scotia, otherwise known as Jabuktuk, Mi'kma'ki. You are a mediator, coach, facilitator, organizational consultant, and you have many years experience in the areas of organizational change, adult and experiential education, and relational leadership. So one thing that I was drawn to from Brook was that she coaches people who want to develop their relational leadership skills and really strengthen their capacity to engage in change from the inside out. And she supports people to build their emotional intelligence, build their confidence, their sense of empowerment, navigate conflict or upheaval, lead with authenticity and compassion, steward an organization through change, and become aware of the use of their own power. She uses a combination of cognitive, embodied, and creative approaches rooted in conflict transformation, popular education and group process, systems theory, mindfulness, deep democracy, and somatic experiencing, which I'm really interested to ask you about, to identify and address personal, interpersonal, and systemic patterns that get in the way of meaningful change. Brook is a white queer cis woman of Jewish, Austrian, and English ancestry. Brook comes to her work from a healing-centered perspective, recognizing both the individual and collective traumas that need to be healed and importance of finding joy and connection. And it's not only about work. For her, that involves singing loudly or walking her dog on the beach. Brook, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Erin. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm so happy to have you, and also, have a little bit of the East Coast back into my life. I've been missing the Atlantic Ocean for sure. So maybe even for folks out there, we are recording this over Zoom, but feeling the little East Coast vibe between us. So thank you so much for being here.
Absolutely. Glad to be.
Yeah, before we start, maybe, I think your bio does a really great job of saying what you do, but maybe you can tell us a little bit more about your journey and really how you got to where you are today.
Sure. Yeah, I actually find that to be a really hard question to answer because it's sort of, it's been a really long route, and it's kind of like, basically I would do a thing, like I'd have things that I did, and probably, early on in my life of, I guess it's like work, but it's also, because what I'm really interested in is making change and social justice and, having a better world. It's like that has sort of integrated throughout all aspects of my life. It's not really just work. And it sort of started, I would say, with like facilitation when I was pretty young. And I would say, like, I've kind of come to what I do now through doing something and then realizing things that I didn't know, often because of messing something up, and then going out and figuring out how to learn that thing that I didn't know and adding that into the toolkit. And so it's been like a really roundabout process, like sort of journeying through working in a range of different sort of community organizations, sort of movement type work. And then, I think one of the really big shifts was probably realizing how much conflict is a thing that really gets in the way of a lot of what people want to be doing in the world. And so and also myself, like I was really struggling with conflict and not feeling good about how relationships were going and all of those kinds of things. And so I became a mediator to fix my own problems and to fix organizational problems. And so it's been, really this kind of just, it's not really a clear path, I guess. Right.
Mm-hmm. And is it ever?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think some people are like, I'm a teacher. I went to teachers college. Now I teach. Right. And it's like, I don't have a clear sort of answer to that. But yes, I recognize that that's probably actually true for most of us. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. Of course. And so as a mediator, you spoke to the wide variety of interests that you have, and the background that you have. How did you get into organizational change and systems theory and thinking and all of that from the kind of more anti-oppression, more social justice work that you have done?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I think social justice work is just fundamentally systems work, because you're trying to change big systemic issues.
Mm.
And I don't think it necessarily gets called that very often. Like when people think about systems work, they're thinking more, I guess, like about social innovation or, sort of shifting institutions or those kinds of things. But the same basic ideas of being able to understand, this is the systemic issue that we're seeing, and this is how it's playing out, and this is the way it's getting in the way of us being able to achieve like a better world, or more just relationships, or a healthier environment, or whatever it is. It sort of just plays out. So I guess what I'm saying is, I think it started really with that sort of more on the ground community-based activism, and like building that systemic awareness. And then over time, I sort of was like, oh, there's actually specific tools that you can use to support people to understand what's happening here, or to be able to really bring out the knowledge within a group about how systems are playing out in a way that can actually move things forward more effectively, or at least help us understand where we're getting stuck, right? So it felt like a really natural kind of path. And then I think the thing that actually like really, really landed it was COVID, right? Like I literally, everything changed about a year and a half ago. I moved with about 24 hours notice. My job changed, my province changed. Like it was a complete change of everything. And it was, mostly really good. It sort of sped up changes that, I had kind of wanted to have happen anyway, but I really didn't like it. I was really uncomfortable. I felt kind of at loose ends. Like I just wanted everything to be stable, and I felt like I was feeling anxious all the time. I was angry. Like it was just really hard, right? And it kind of it just landed it on a really personal level, that when we're talking about making big change, what we often don't think about is that actually we don't really like change. Like it's not actually a thing that our bodies want. Like we want a certain amount of stability, right? And so that really got me thinking about, okay, so what it feels like I've been building toward is there's this inner work that happens with change, and then there's like interpersonal work. It's like those struggles and that resistance and that, fear of the unknown and desire for familiarity, it shows up in all of the levels. And so there's like ways that you can sort of host or facilitate or support transformation for individual people, and for groups, and for relationships, and for organizations, and for systems. And so I just kind of got really inspired to have that be sort of the focus of what I was doing.
Wow, yeah, and nothing like sitting around at home. I'm sure not all of us are sitting around at home, but at least a quarantine for the first 3 or 4 months, to really expedite those processes, and to really uncover what lies beneath the surface that a lot of us haven't dealt with, or weren't dealing with.
Totally.
And so that kind of, you said something there about, leading into this almost this acceptance of change, like, understanding that change is inevitable in the big
Totally.
scheme of things, right? And I really want to ask you about that, because for coaches, especially when they, the whole goal almost of coaching or hiring a coach is to instill some sort of change in your life, right? And I often wonder what people are striving for in that. Is it that they just need to accept that change is happening, or is it also that they really see something and pinpoint and need to change that? And I guess in your work, with organizations, but also personal, if you do one-on-one work as well within that organization, do you see that struggle with people?
Oh, yes, all the time. I mean, it's like people want a change and have been working toward a change for a really long time. And that could be personal change, that could be within the organization. And then they get on the edge of that change happening. And there's all kinds of resistance that comes up, right? Like there's just kind of like, now people all of a sudden are fighting this thing that they've wanted, or they're questioning whether it's really going to happen. There's all kinds of sort of fear that comes up. Fear is probably the big one, but then, I mean, fear often shows up as anger or as rigidity, or like all kinds of different ways, right? So yeah, I mean, I think, it really, like, there really is this, I think a big part of my role is actually just to kind of, metaphorically hold people's hands and sort of support them to remember that this is actually something that they want. And even though the process of getting through it feels really terrifying and overwhelming, and like, actually, maybe I just want to go back to the way things were, because at least I know what that is.
Yes.
That what they're trying to move toward is actually really worth it, right? And that it's worth, like, going through that fear.
Yeah. Oh, that's big. That's big. And we can't forget, that icky, sticky goo, that substance of really going into the thick of things. And it's not something we want to do, but it's often very beneficial. And it's that moment of kind of letting go.
Yeah.
And really turning toward. And I find that in mindfulness too, just that sense, it is, okay, I see a light at the end of the tunnel, or I see what I'm going to kind of metamorphosize into. But I can't see, and I can't predict, like you said, this uncertainty. I can't know all the things that are in this dark shadow space. And so that brings me to another good question, which is, when things come up like that for people, okay, do you just like stand by and watch it happen for a second and allow that, right?
Yeah.
And then what? Like, I know that you do some embodied practices and somatic experiencing, deep democracy. What is? Let's talk about a few of those.
Yeah. I mean, to sort of, I think, yeah, I mean, there is a certain amount of just letting the things come up and seeing what they need to do, and giving space for whatever those pieces that people are struggling. Like, I mean, I think, this is actually, I think one of the, how I said at the beginning that, that I sort of stumble into things where it's like, oh, I all of a sudden have just realized that I don't know enough about this thing, and so I better go learn something else. And I think that's really what happened with the somatic work is, I mean, partly I did that for my own well-being, but then I started realizing, as I was doing my own, somatic processing, that it was really, really helpful in supporting people going through some sort of transformation organizationally as well. And I also realized that it was kind of the piece that was missing from a lot of the conflict work, or a lot of the organizational change work, which was that people, it's like you have to hold the process that people are going through. You can't just go to a cognitive level. Like, people's bodies are actually very present in any kind of change process. People's nervous systems, people's sort of unconscious patterns are very present and get very activated when we're going through some sort of change. And so it's about, like, slowing down and giving it enough space for that stuff to come up. So it's like getting quiet, slowing down whatever the dialogue is or whatever the process is, letting the things unfold, letting it happen. And then also knowing when people are going too fast, right? So, change is inevitable, but we do have a capacity to play with the speed of change, right? So if something is just too overwhelming, if something is moving too quickly, what can you do to actually make it possible for someone to stay with the pace that it's going? Is there a way to slow down, to do some grounding, to connect with things that bring a sense of security and joy and are not overwhelming, right? And like, how do you actually support people to be able to move through the change as wholly as possible, right? And so I think that's one of the really big things that the somatic work has brought. I'm not totally sure if that answers your question. Like, do you want to know more specifically about what it is, or?
Yeah,
Yeah,
let's dig a bit deeper. What is somatic work for the folks out there, you know? And I
yeah,
have kind of like an awareness about it, but honestly, I'm not too familiar either. So,
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's, I practice a particular sort of branch of somatics that's called somatic experiencing, which actually comes out of a trauma therapy and body work model.
mm,
And I don't really do, I'm not a therapist, I'm not a body worker. I don't do deep sort of trauma processing with people, but stress and anxiety and fear and all of these kinds of things actually show up in our lives and in our bodies very similarly to how like a deeper unprocessed trauma shows up in terms of our fight, flight, freeze responses, in terms of how our nervous system, reacts to situations that feel threatening. And change is extremely threatening, right? And so when people are going through some sort of change, it's like you can just go with a cognitive kind of like, well, you said you want this, and let's explore what it is that's getting in the way when you said you wanted it, and that can be really helpful. But sometimes you actually just slow down and ask someone to really just observe, what are you feeling in your body? What's happening right now? Like, is that connected to any kind of memories or images? Are there, any particular thoughts that are coming up? Are there any emotions that are coming up with the physical sensation? Like, really just allowing people to explore the embodied experience of whatever that fight response or flight response or trigger might be in that situation. And that has the benefit of bringing deeper awareness, but it also has the benefit of potentially deactivating some of that response, right? So by spending time with it and witnessing it, it's very similar to mindfulness in a lot of ways, right? Where it's like
mhm.
you're witnessing something arise, and by witnessing it arise without getting swept away by it, you're also giving your nervous system the opportunity to allow it to pass and move to a more restful state, which is also where you're more able to be in relationship, where you're more able to like take other people's perspectives. And so that's extremely helpful in conflict, right? But it's also just helpful in terms of supporting people to navigate many sticky situations in their lives.
Yes. Oh my goodness, yes. It's that sense of, being able to observe it without, yeah, like you said, getting swept away, getting stuck
Yeah,
in it or lost in it, which is often what happens, in conflict in general. And
totally.
I'm curious, Brooke, because you mentioned in your bio as well, these interpersonal obstacles, which, I think most folks would understand, interpersonal, okay, like that's communication and how can we get around that? And especially in a workplace or what have you. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah. So, the conflict, the
Yeah.
like all of the mediation and those kinds of pieces would be around those interpersonal pieces for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
then inner obstacles, and I'm sure that comes up in your work when you're working with organizations, maybe even with management teams specifically.
Hmm.
I feel like that's more of like everyone's on their own journey
Yeah.
together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's totally, yeah. And it's, so, I mean, that's more, like if you think about, like, that's more the coaching work, right? And the kind of more one-on-one support around what are the particular obstacles that one person is experiencing in relation to whatever it is that they're trying to make happen. Or, you know, and because I'm very focused on sort of change, organizational change, system change, it's often around the kinds of things that come up in ourselves that are representing the systems that we're wanting to change. So, you know, am I interested, for example, as a white person, in shifting dynamics around, like, racial dynamics within my organization, but I can feel in myself that sometimes there's defensiveness that comes up around some of the conversations that are happening, right? And so maybe I want to do some sort of personal inner work around the ways that defensiveness is showing up in me, so that I can show up in that larger group in a way that is more supportive of what we're trying to achieve, right? Mm-hmm. Or a lot of the time when I'm working specifically with people in leadership, there's this real sort of feeling of, you know, I mean, it's very hard for people to feel not liked generally, right? But when someone's in a position of leadership, there's always going to be people that are going to be challenging them, or that are going to disagree with the decisions that they make, or are just going to see leader and be in opposition to that power difference, right? Yeah. And so supporting people who are in leadership to be able to separate their own, you know, fears of being disliked, or kind of reactions to the sometimes difficult responses that they might get from people, so that they can actually show up in ways that they want to, without reactivity and defensiveness and all of those kinds of things. So that's like a couple examples of the sorts of work it might be.
Yes, thank you so much for giving that. I also feel like I have a better understanding of what it is, the work that you do. And you know, it sounds a lot like coaching in general, like private coaching, but you do it both private, or, you know, with one-on-one clients, and also with bigger organizations, which is amazing. And I guess that kind of stirs up another question in me, which is, why do we need these changes? You know, is it just big companies, like in your example, you know, 2020 hits, oh, Black Lives Matter, I didn't realize that I've been racist for X amount of years, and now I have these, you know, this whole pattern in my own company that I run, you know. Why else do we need this? Or, you know, is there some other reasons why people would seek you out?
Well, I mean, I am interested in working specifically with people and organizations and communities that are actively seeking change. So a more economically just world, or a more environmentally just and sustainable world, or, you know. And so I think, like, the people that I'm seeking, and the people that are drawn to the work that I'm doing are fundamentally interested in change. Like, it's sort of, it's pretty rare that someone would come to me and be like, I like things just how they are. I want everything just to stay exactly as it is.
Right.
I actually can't think of a single one of my clients currently that would feel that way, right? And so I think, you know, it's like, as you were saying before, change is totally inevitable. There's no real way to avoid it. And even though we don't like it, there are many people are aware that there's many very positive things that could come out of a deeper capacity to move into change, and accept that it's inevitable, and learn to, I mean, I don't know if it's ever really comfortable. I don't think it's ever really comfortable, but, you know, to be more able to just kind of be in it and allow what needs to emerge, and not even just allow what needs to emerge happen, but like actually have some capacity to shape it. Because I think when we're stuck in the sort of natural animal survival-based fear of change, we lose some of our capacity to impact it. And so then we're kind of even more, we have even less agency to be able to move through that change in ways that feel helpful.
Yeah, that agency is key. It's like, it's this sense of, you know, I want to be able to move with this change, like, and ride the wave, you know, and still like learn to let go of the things that aren't serving me, but also don't lose my control, you know, have some sort of internal locus still in there, and maybe even external if that, you know, if it is in terms of your team, actually being able to learn how to be a better teammate.
Yeah. Yeah. And I sort of see it as fluidity. Like it's like sometimes you lose control. And actually, that's fine. And chaos is part, you know, I actually really strongly believe that chaos is the thing that is most likely to happen right before some sort of big transformation happens. And so it's not necessarily about, and that might be inner chaos, right? Like I might just be totally, you know, freaking out about something right before the transformation that I'm looking for actually happens, right? And so it's not necessarily about avoiding losing control. It's about having the fluidity to be able to sometimes lose control or go into the chaos and have a certain amount of confidence that you'll be able to find your way back.
Yeah.
To a place that's a little bit more in balance.
Yeah, I like that. Like a tree that kind of remains rooted with, you know, in a hurricane or in a tornado.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bend, not break, or maybe, you know, lose it for a few branches, but be able to snap back when you need to.
Yeah.
That's awesome. And, you know, there's this other sense that I'm feeling of, you know, if we want to really be the change that we wish to see, you know, that beautiful Margaret Mead quote, maybe overdone. I don't know. I love it. I love it.
Me too. I'm into
it. But really having this, you know, where I'm okay, there's a question at the tip of my tongue here, and I really want to get at it. There's something to be said for, you know, a boss kind of hiring you for an organization to kind of consult with. Where do you see the most hiccups? Like, are there people who are really resistant to it right at the get-go? Or are they all, like you said, kind of like, okay, let's do this thing. Like I am in agreement at least that we have to change.
Yeah, I mean, there's always resistance. And I think, you know, and there's wisdom in that resistance. I don't think that just because someone comes and says, this is the change that we need to happen, that that's always exactly the change that needs to happen, right? So you can know that something isn't working the way it is and need to go through sometimes a very messy process of figuring out what would actually in the end, lead this group of people who have a shared vision or a shared purpose, come through it to something that is healthier or, you know, more effective or more connected or whatever it is that they're trying to do, right? So there is always resistance, and really, I think pretty much everyone has some kind of resistance. And what the change is, I think it's really important to listen to that resistance and that's part of the chaos, right? It would be much easier if you could just go in and say, okay, this is the problem. Here's where we want to go. And now we just need to figure out what the steps are to get there. But actually, it's like, here's the problem. And this is our sort of pie in the sky vision of where we want to go. But we don't even really know what that means because we've never been there. And so being able to actually, you know, there's this like this sort of idea of like really, really making sure to learn what needs to be learned within the group that needs to do the learning, or that needs to be going through the process. And that it's so unknown sometimes when you start off with a process, whether that's like an individual coaching process, or, you know, a group facilitation, or whatever it is. I think the most effective change is actually really very unknown in terms of what it's going to end up being.
It makes me chuckle because what you're saying is so similar, like parallel, maybe even the same, to the process of healing. And for folks out there, some of the audience knows my story. I studied naturopathic medicine. I helped people in that field for a while, and you know, people come. One of my biggest criticisms of like not just the healthcare system today, but everybody, people go to their doctor thinking that they have this magic pill, you know, that healing is linear, that they're going to go from point A to point B very quickly, and that they're going to understand it, like you said, cognitively understand it, and then past that, they want it yesterday. You know, they want it already, which is useful in the way of like, you know, set an intention, get there. But what is health? You know, what is healing? And that when it comes to this, like this final outcome, I'm curious for your folks, you know, do they have that North Star, or do they want to be, you know, less racist in the organization or more inclusive? But what actually is that, you know, and how do we break that down? As this might be just a rhetorical question or a question for the folks, everybody, listeners, how do we get there? How do we break that down for us, and what does it look like? I'm sure it's individual for everybody, you know, but
yeah, it's very individual. I mean, you know, there are definitely some basic principles and practices around you know, creating healthier organizations, and, you know, like, I guess you could say best practices, although I'm a little bit hesitant to use that word, because I think, you know, really every situation is going to be different, because you're dealing with different people and you're dealing with a different context. And, you know, I actually really liked that you brought up that it is healing. It is very similar to healing. So like, if you think about, you know, from a naturopathic perspective, a body is really like a combination of a whole bunch of systems that are in conversation and sometimes in conflict with each other, right? And it's like you have to listen to each of those systems to understand where the balance is off, or like what, and then shifting one thing can have all kinds of spin-off effects that you would never really expect, right? And so you think you're doing something that's leading to greater health, and then you discover, oh wait, now this other system in the body is out of balance because of this thing that we did to address, you know, and I think that's very, you can think of an organization as a body, or any collective of people is a body, where each person within that is basically like an organ system, or, you know, like a meridian system, or whichever kind of healing framework you're working within. And so there's a conversation that's happening between all of those people, and then also between all of the teams of all of the different people. And so there isn't really a straightforward answer, right? And this is kind of what I mean when I say, I think, you know, people, you're absolutely right. People want to go, they want a diagnosis. They want to know, what are our steps, 1, 2, 3, how will we know when we've succeeded? And it's like an ongoing, ever-changing, constant assessing kind of practice. And that is very exciting, and also very overwhelming, and often not very appealing to people, because they want something easy that's going to make the problem go away.
Exactly.
So I don't really have an easy answer for you in terms of that question.
I don't know if
um,
there is one.
yeah.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, but you've pointed to very I mean I think yeah, what that points out is that we are a, or at least I have grown up in a society of convenience, right? And so I want everything when I want it, and it's easy, and I can get an app for that and whatever else. Just, already paid for something on Amazon without even blinking, and it's just so incredibly easy to think that things don't have a process. And so
Mhm.
part of the work, I think, in healing, whatever kind of healing that is to really, yeah, include all the systems, and to also break down that first belief of thinking that that it might be easy, or that it's just as simple as like starting the process. And maybe it is just as simple as starting it. It's
Yeah.
a very interesting paradox that we have going here.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, it's interesting to think about actually, because I think um, the deepest learning that comes out of really trying to make some sort of change is the recognition, and this is sort of systems awareness, right? Like if you really think about the way that systems work, anything that you do has the potential to have all kinds of unexpected uh, impacts, right? And
Mhm.
so it's like sometimes you actually have to try a whole bunch of different things and see what the impacts are, and then readjust and do something different and learn from that, and keep kind of trying and over and over again. Um, and but the thing is, the skill that you learn in doing that is actually to be able to be really comfortable with not knowing. And I feel like that is a deep skill that we could all develop more, is
Mm.
that sort of capacity to be like, I don't know what this is going to do. We have some good guesses based on some past experience and based on some things that we've tried to think that this might have a good impact. So let's try it and see, but let's also be prepared to notice if it's not working, and to also notice if it's actually having a negative impact and readjust, right? And to have the sort of flexibility and fluidity and willingness to acknowledge that something maybe isn't working and needs to be shifted.
Yes. Typically, do people come to you for a certain amount of time?
Well, I mean, I don't know, it really varies, actually. That's an interesting question. I mean, when I think about it in terms of coaching, I have some people that have come to me for like 2 or 3 sessions because they had a very specific thing that they wanted to, like, I support a lot of people to kind of prepare for a mediation or something like that. And that might just be a couple sessions to
Mhm.
make sure that they're really clear on what they're trying to get out of it and those kinds of things. And I have people who've been doing sort of deeper processing, somatic work with me for like a year. Um, and then organizationally, lots of people will just come to me for a specific issue. Like they're like, we have this problem going on in the organization. Can you help us get back on track? Or we're disagreeing about this piece of our purpose. Can you help us straighten out where we're on the same page and where we need to make some adjustments, right? And so it'll be a very specific ask. Then I have
Mm.
other people that come in a much longer kind of time frame where they're really more interested in shifting the organizational culture, and there's a recognition that that's something that happens over years, right? And so they kind of come back anytime there's something that's not quite working right, or they have continual coaching for whoever the person is who's trying to do the sort of interchange work. So it
Mm.
really varies depending on what people want.
Mhm.
Um, yeah,
Yeah, it's hard to slap a timeline on those things.
totally. Yes. And people want a timeline for sure, but
Yeah.
a lot of it just actually is ongoing healing work, right? And that takes the time that it takes.
Mhm. And it's true that, I think the role of a coach, whether it be, a naturopathic doctor or someone in the health field or someone like yourself who's a mediator, is to really point out the progress that someone
Yeah.
has gone through without even knowing. It could be 6 months down the road and they could be well on their way, and have accomplished 2 or 3 major things and still don't know because they still consider themselves, not healthy or, not really feeling comfortable in it.
Absolutely. Oh, I'm actually really glad that you mentioned that. Yeah, I think it can be really easy to just jump from problem to problem, and just kind of say, okay, what's the next thing we need to do, or what's still not working, and there it is actually, I think, a huge part of the healing process to pause and notice and actually really celebrate the things that are different. Like even thinking about, like looking back 2 years ago, how was I doing then? Or how was this organization doing then? Oh, wow, we are able to have so much more difficult conversations than we used to be able to have 2 years ago. And even though sometimes those conversations lead to conflict, or even though many of us still feel like we don't get along on a day-to-day basis, the fact that we're even able to enter into the kind of conversations that we're able to have now is a massive transformation, right? And so really just encouraging people to notice that and celebrate it and be proud of the journey that they've been on.
Wow. Yeah. Oh, so good. So good. And so necessary.
Yeah.
Brooke, I'm seeing the time here. I want to give you as much space as possible to, express anything else that you wanted to, if we didn't touch on it. I know I do have a couple more questions left for you, but, just letting the folks know how they can get in contact with you and, how does one start the process?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I work, my workplace, my business is called Big Waves. And you can find me at bigwaves.ca. And my email is brooke@bigwaves.ca. And I'm on many of the social platforms, Instagram and Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn. And I'm just about to start blogging again. And if anyone is, I haven't done that in a number of years and I'm just about to start up. And so if anyone is interested in getting a very occasional blog post, because I am definitely not a prolific blogger, but that's something that you can definitely sign up for on my mailing list. And I'm happy to have any conversations with people if you have questions too.
Yeah, and I really wanted to have this conversation because there is a sense of health, and for up until probably 10 episodes ago, this podcast has been really focused on alternative health and within the, still kind of more mainstream of, I guess, biological and physiological and mental health. But we have, really branched out here and started talking more about how people feel in relationship, in team settings, in organizational settings. And I think there's a lot to be said for that, for the health of your team. And, we spend so much time at work. We spend, I would say, probably 80% of our lives at work or with doing work, with people. And that's so, so important to remember.
Yeah. Yeah. And also, I mean, for a lot of the people, a lot of the people that I work with, it's beyond work too, right? Like this is actually about, for many people, it becomes really a part of people's lives because it's something that they care about deeply in the world, or they're really worried about the climate crisis, or they're really deeply invested in, more justice or whatever it might be. And so it becomes people's, like the relationships, the work relationships, or it's like sometimes it's work with quotations, and sometimes it kind of moves and merges into all the rest of life too, right? So all of a sudden people are like having the same kinds of conversations or the same kinds of struggles in their non-work time, and so it becomes even more personal and sometimes more hurtful in some ways too, when those relationships are hard.
Big waves.
Yeah.
Very big waves.
Totally.
Brooke, I have a final question for you, and this is something I ask all my guests here on the podcast, and that is, what keeps you inspired?
What keeps me inspired? I want to be really honest that I sometimes struggle with that. And there are many things that keep me inspired. And I think like I have many concerns about the future and sort of what's happening in the world and where everything is going, and how do we sort of make the how do we move in a direction that feels more life affirming, and healthy, and concerned about the well-being of like all beings. And so I have a lot of fears that come up around that. And then also I feel deeply inspired by the ways that people are facing those fears and continuing to uh, move toward trying to make things better. And I think it's like I actually wouldn't be able to not do this work because it would just feel like giving up. And so it's like I'm actually doing the work that makes me feel like there's a possibility for a better future.
Wow. Yes, that is beautiful and so inspiring. Brooke, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for
Oh,
inviting me.
yeah, this has been episode 45 of Inspiring Insights. Thank you everyone for coming as well. Wow, round of applause for Brooke Thorndycraft. Thank you again for being here. It's been amazing.